Will I be impressed with magic pressing? Hey there, today I have a very special CGC unboxing video, and in this video I'm going to open up 5 comic books that made their way to CGC, but had a little bit of a stopover with a third-party presser. And I am super excited. I've been waiting to do this for a long time, and I finally have the results here to share with you, where I've selected 5 comic books that, based on my opinion and my analysis of the books, I felt like they were in need of at least a press, if not a little bit of a dry clean and press, in order to improve the grade. But I have been, let's just say, lacking some self-confidence in cleaning and pressing books myself, and I want to get to a point where I have established an honest working relationship with some third-party pressers for my more significant comics, where I can press and clean maybe books that are more at my level as an amateur and a beginner. But if I really, really want optimal results and I want the books to sit with a professional and let them be the best at what they can do with their craft, then I'm going to send my more significant books, and by significance I mean books that have more value or more potential value if pressed and cleaned properly. So this will be the first in hopefully a series of videos where I'm reviewing third-party pressers. And in this video, I'm going to be reviewing magic pressing. Now, I first found magic pressing through Instagram, where we connected and I had a conversation where I was asking some questions around their service, different fees, turnaround times, experience, and just trying to get to know who they are and kind of what services they're offering and just kind of how they approach pressing and just basically trying to figure out, is this kind of a side gig? Is it a hobby? Are you somebody like me that just kind of does it off to the side? And I wanted to find a pressing service where they consider it a business and this is what they do. And I found that with Magic Pressing. Magic Pressing is located in New York. I was trying to think too, like, does the geography or the location of the presser really matter in terms of turnaround times and things like that? But there were some basic questions that I asked in terms of where are they located, what are the turnaround times? And then what's great about Instagram is I didn't have to see examples, because Magic Pressing's page was filled with different examples of before and after, and there's just tons there that you can see for yourself in terms of the work. And there is a leap of faith, right, that you take when you're sending your prized possessions to somebody, whether it be CGC, a presser, in the mail to a buyer. There's always some risk involved when the books basically get out of your hands. So for me, the questions around price, turnaround, some general interview type questions, and then ultimately also, could the presser forward my books onto CGC? So the way that I did it was I went onto the CGC website, I created a submission for these books, and then once I completed the submission, I sent the books and the CGC packing slip to Magic Pressing. Magic Pressing then received the books, and then once Magic Pressing confirmed the receipt that the books were in hand, then they sent me an invoice, I paid the invoice, and then they began the pressing service. So that was basically how that worked out. And that is something I would definitely recommend if you're going to work with a third party, is figure out, when do they need their money? Some pressers will want it at the beginning, some in the middle, some in the very end. So you'll have to kind of work that out. Figure out, when do they want to be paid, how do they want to be paid, and so forth. Once I pretty much confirmed that this was somebody that I wanted to do business with, the next question was, which books am I going to send for pressing? Now, I have some analysis that I've done where I can identify comic books in my collection that would benefit from a press and clean, and if they were to be pressed and cleaned correctly, then they could obviously get the better grade, but what comes along with that better grade is a more valuable encapsulated collectible. So I had that analysis set aside, but I had to manually kind of go through this to figure out which books are going to be part of this experiment. Because no offense to anyone that I'm doing business with, but I was not prepared to send somebody I had never worked with before one of my more rare or higher grade prized possessions. So, what I wanted to do was find some middle ground. So, I hand selected these 5 comic books because I felt like they could be improved with a clean and press. But there was some significant value if the books really did come back in higher grades. So I didn't want it to be a waste where maybe I'm sending 5 moderns and did they bump it from a 9.6 to 9.8? Was that really because they pressed it or was because I got CGC on a good day? I wanted to have some books where it was noticeable that there were pressable defects, but they were borderline books that I don't know if I would have pressed myself, or maybe I could have, but I wasn't quite ready to. And I tried to hone in on like 5 of those types of books where I felt like it would be a good trial and a good experiment, but it wouldn't waste the presser's time working on, I don't want to say lesser tier books, but just not maybe some of the more valuable books that they're used to working on. I wanted to respect their time, but then I also wanted to make sure that even in a worst case scenario, I send the books off, they get a particular grade, there was a cost involved, that I wasn't out a lot of money, and I wanted to make the experiment a little bit, economic friendly too. So here's what we're going to do. Here's kind of the plan here. I want to walk you through the 5 books that I selected. I'll show you what my predicted grades were, show you some of the cost involved with getting the books pressed and where I acquired the books, how much did I pay for them. So I'm kind of doing this a little bit out of order than I normally would. And then once I've gone through the 5 books, I'm going to unbox the shipment that I received from CGC, where I do not know the grades of the books. So this is going to be a real unboxing where you're going to get my live reaction. It is not a pre-screen. So I don't know the grades that these books got. So I'm nervous. I'm excited. I think this is really, really cool. And my fingers are crossed that this is just going to be a win-win all around, where I'm able to highlight a great third-party presser in Magic Pressing, and I can start to develop a relationship and a partnership where I'm sending and queuing comics that are kind of at this tier or above in terms of significance and value in my collection, and putting it in really, really good, trustworthy hands. So let's take a quick look at the 5 books that I sent in and look at some of the numbers, and then we will get to that CGC unboxing. All right, so here are the 5 comic books that I decided to send to Magic Pressing. You can see that cost associated for me to have the book pressed and cleaned is $18 per book. So when you're talking cost with your third-party presser, obviously you want to make sure that the cost up front is understood. You'll notice sometimes too they will run specials, so you want to check in and see if they have any upcoming holiday sales or so on, or even buying some credits ahead of time. But for me at the time, I basically took the $15 per book fee plus an additional $3 per book for another $15 to actually send the books and ship them off to Magic Pressing. So like I do when I'm paying for shipping or I have to pay tax to acquire a book, I want to make sure that the total cost overall is tracked and cataloged here. So I put this down as $18 per book. If you're going to send more, maybe your shipping is less, or maybe your shipping's more if you're sending more books, and you'll have to factor that in. So for me, it was $18 per book to have each one pressed and sent again on November 16th, 2022. So just tremendous, tremendous turnaround between Magic Pressing and CGC. So I'm super, super thankful. And think about this also, where I had done an unboxing maybe a month or so ago, and I waited an entire year because CCS held my books for about 9 months, 8 or 9 months. It was sitting at CCS. And then finally, when I got the books, a couple of them got grade bumps. A few of them didn't. The CGC holder, although it's not really the fault of CCS or any pressing, but I had to send that back in for a mechanical error, and it was just an awful experience. It all added to just basically such a disappointing experience that I wanted to try something else. And that's what I'm doing here, is through this experiment with Magic Pressing, is I'm trying other options. So let's go through the 5 books. The first book, Star Wars 31. I actually picked this up from a local comic book shop, which I don't talk about very often. This comic book shop essentially has the same set of back issues in the middle of the store, and occasionally I'll wander in, but really not that often. It's always the same books that I see, but they happen to have a handful of older Star Wars Volume 1 from the late 70s, early 80s, and I picked up a small stack of books, and I remember at the time looking at issue 31 going, this looks to be high grade. I ended up grading it a 9.4. It cost me $5 to pick it up from the LCS, so I paid $5 plus a little bit of tax. This view, by the way, is disconnected from my collection view, so this is a copy of all that information, so I don't have a lot of values floating in and out here. But the total cost was essentially the price of the book plus tax. The other 4 books I picked up from 4 different sellers on Atomic Avenue. The first is Amazing Spider-Man 287. I bought that for $9 at a total cost of $9. There was no tax or shipping on that. Amazing Spider-Man 251, I picked up for $18. And Sandman number 12, and this one is probably the one I'm most interested in because I picked it up for $3.75 because the seller had indicated that there was a scratch on the front cover. And I examined that book over and over, and I didn't see any scratches. It really looked like there was a misunderstanding where the seller saw art on the book and thought that it was a scratch or some sort of line. So that one, I'm really interested to see how that one turned out. So those 3 from Atomic Avenue, I graded 9.4. And then the last book is a book that was a replacement for one of my childhood books, and that's Classic X-Men number 1. I love that Arthur Adams cover, the all-white background. I just love that book, and I paid $10 on Atomic Avenue to pick that up, plus probably some shipping at some point for a total cost of $11. Now, again, why did I select these 5? Because I think they're all kind of middle of the road in terms of value. And if you look at column Y in the CGC value here, in a 9.4 and a 9.2, at the time, these CGC values, like I said, are disconnected from my live value analysis. So at the time I sent these to the presser, all of these books had value in their current grade. In the grade that I gave them raw, I felt like even if I paid for pressing and I paid for the grading services and grading fees and the shipping between all of these locations, that I could probably, in a worst case, get my money back or stand to add just a little bit of value to my collection, right? So for example, that Star Wars 31 in a 9.4 has a value of $70. So it cost me $5.48 to acquire it, plus the $18 to press, ship it to the presser, plus the $25-ish to $30-ish from CGC. And if you're doing the math at home, it ends up being around somewhere between $50 and $55 of a total investment in Star Wars 31 to get it in a 9.4. So that was my thinking, right? Is even if I were to go through all of that hassle and not get a grade bump, I was still able to reduce my risk where I wasn't underwater on that book. Now, has this book dropped in value from the last month? Maybe. But that was the thinking between all of these. Now, you can see some of these are getting a little bit close, borderline. ASM 251, I had a total cost of $18 to acquire that book. Then if you're adding the $18 for pressing and so forth. But better yet, let's look at a calculation. So let me go all the way to the end here and then look at this column CJ. And this is the total cost and then the CGC value after the total cost. So here's that calculation. So if we're looking at ASM 251, if I were to receive that book in a CGC 9.4, then I have added $27 to my collection, and that's after purchasing the book, having it pressed and clean, and sent off to CGC and so forth. So you could see here, it's the margin gets very thin when you're committed to doing this, but I wanted to make sure that the books that I'm selecting still have some value built in if the book came back in the grade that I had assigned to it going out. And the reason I do this is to give all of this whole order like this cushion. So it helps cushion the risk where I'm not just blindly sending books off and then I realize I spent way too much to have a book pressed and cleaned. I spent way too much to acquire it. And then after it's all said and done, it didn't get the grade bump. I'm disappointed and I lost money. I want to avoid that. So I feel like, okay, If for some reason ASM 251 comes back, it's a 9.4. I'm disappointed in the process. And that I could at least add it to my collection and just be satisfied knowing that I did at least add a little bit of value and maybe try again to upgrade that book down the road. Now, if we look at the grades and the grade potential, this is where it gets fun and interesting. So I've talked about what happens if the books come back and they are the grades I gave them. So essentially, they went through the third party pressing and they didn't help. It just, I think they're a 9.4. The presser just said, yep, it's a 9.4. Whatever magic magic pressing did or didn't do to the books, they are what they are. But what if they got a grade bump? Now, I'll be honest with as you see here in these three columns, sometimes between a 9.4 and a 9.6, the values do get reversed. Again, that's not really my fault. It's just kind of the way that the value sources I use just kind of work and operate. Obviously, you would expect a 9.4 to be worth less than a 9.6 and a 9.8, but sometimes the 9.4s and 9.6s are a little interchangeable or they're about even, which is weird. So like Star Wars 31, you'll see a 9.6 is $66, 9.4 is $70. So I'd kind of give a range to both of those of around $65 to $70. ASM 287 is probably more typical of what you would see. $60 in a 9.4, $88 in a 9.6, $257.50 in a 9.8. So looking at column AO, this is really where I'm hoping that if I can get a significant bump from 9.4 to 9.8, 9.2 to 9.8 here, then we're really talking something magical. So my fingers are crossed when I get to the unboxing, then I'm going to hit 9.8s on some of these. But if I don't, it's okay. I've got that cushion built in. But look at some of these potential numbers. Classic X-Men #1 at a 9.8, 352. Sandman 12 at 245. ASM 251 at 185. And then up to Star Wars 31, 272. So another reason why I selected these 5 books, and I've got a collection full of books that are like they're head scratchers for me. Are they 9.6? Are they 9.8? Do they need a press? They're all close because I try and do so much research, analysis, and investing in high grade books for this very reason, because there is that potential to get them clean, pressed, preserved, encapsulated, professionally graded, and so forth to maximize the grade. And where I feel like sometimes I could do this on my own, I really would prefer a professional handle the books for me to get the grade bump. So I think it's time to get to this unboxing now that we've seen the numbers. And I'm going to come back here once I'm all done and we'll fill in the CGC value after pressing to summarize the value that I added to my collection. Hopefully it's positive after reviewing the books, the grades, and the current CGC values of those books in the grades they got. Here we go. Okay, here we go. This is the CGC unboxing of the 5 books that I sent to Magic Pressing. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I have not seen the grades yet, and I will compare each reveal to my prediction and see how it turned out. Here we go. All right, so I think I'll just slide them out. You got the bottom part here. Can't see the grades. Go this way. All right, so here it is. Here's the first book. This is Star Wars 31 from Marvel Comics in 1980. And this I picked up at an LCS. And I thought that this was a 9.4. And it needed a clean and a press. So let's see what it got. 9.6 white pages. Now, of course, the only thing with this one was the 9.6 and the 9.4 value were kind of the same. And I'll have to look at some data on that just to see why it's... But it looks really, really nice. I'm still seeing, a couple of minor spine ticks, but it looks like a really, really crisp copy. I think I see why it wouldn't get the 9.8. There's a tiny, tiny fold down here on this corner that broke color, and I really think that that's probably what did it in. There's a little bit of a color rubber color lift right there, and just a tiny, tiny bit of impact crunch down here. So, no miracle could have been worked on this book, but definitely got the 9.4 to 9.6 bump on this one. So nice job. Next up is Amazing Spider-Man 251. And this is just part of the great Hobgoblin run in ASM from the 230s. It just kept going into what seemed like the 280s. It's just a great character. Different iterations of Hobgoblin, unmaskings, and here we've got Spider-Man pulling up the mask here. I really thought that this book had the potential to get a nice significant bump. I had this as a 9.4, so let's see what it got. 9.6. All right, so I'm seeing a small sample size, but a little bit of a trend here. Yeah, I think everything looks really, really nice that I can see. I just down here, there's just a little bit of a flap coming back on the corner. This one's tough. It looks really, really good. It just on the corners, on both corners, there's just a touch of whitening or an issue that, gosh, it's probably borderline 9896, but it got the bump. I did have it as a 9.4, and structurally it looks really, really good. So what I was worried about is what I see pressing creases or reversion or other things like that, and the book looks really, really solid and really strong. So again, 2 for 2 on the grade bump. All right, the next book is Amazing Spider-Man 287. This book has some additional value. I think we've got Daredevil on the cover. And it was one of those where I just didn't realize that in a high grade, in a CGC high grade, it was such a valuable book. And I remember getting this very, very recently, right before November, and turned it around and sent it off to Magic Pressing for hopefully a grade bump. This one, too, I had sort of pre-screened or self-assigned a 9.4 to this book. Let's see what it got. 9.2. Okay. That's not the direction I wanted. Wow, and in this one, I can see a pretty significant crease right here under the staple. And then another crease down here by the staple. I mean, I could see it plain. It's very easy to see, so that's unfortunate. Everything else looks really, really nice. It's just by both staples, just a really bad crease. I would think that would be something that even with just a minimal quick press would come out. But yeah, that's unfortunate. There's also a scratch on the surface. So, okay, well, so much for that risk, assuming that it would at least stay at the grade or go above. I don't know what I missed, but I can tell already from the two bigger creases that I would have expected that to come out with a press. So this one I'm definitely disappointed in, only because I can see the defects right here, where I would, if I got this book and it was more of a significant book, I would consider cracking it and having it pressed again. So this one, yeah, I'm not really happy with this one. All right, let's see how the rest turned out. I got 2 more to go. And this is Sandman 12. So this was the book that I had mentioned where the seller had indicated that the book was near mint, but it had some sort of scratch or crease on the front cover, so they made it very, very affordable. It was quite inexpensive as compared to fair market value. When I assessed the book, I angled this book in the light, moved it back and forth, and I couldn't see what they were talking about except on the cover art. I did notice that there was a line, and I thought that the seller got confused. So let's see who's right on this one. And even with my assessment of the book being in better condition than the seller had listed it, I still give it a 9.4. So with this one, I'm hoping that everything was kind of a misunderstanding or it was not assessed correctly. It got a nice clean impress, and it got the bump. Let's see. All right, well, 9.4. Yeah, so this was right in there, and trying to get an angle. You can kind of see right above my finger. That's what I think the seller was saying. There's a scratch across the cover. If that was a scratch, it wouldn't get the 9.4. So at least I was right about the art. But again, I'm seeing, as I angle it here, I'm seeing 3 or 4 creases. So now I'm starting to get annoyed. Honestly, I'm more than just disappointed. I can count as I'm shifting it here in the light and holding it. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, roughly 5, like almost covered dents, not non-color breaking dents, and I can see the presser's crease going along the side. You know, and that's where pressers will say, well, that's just the ridge of the book and the cover and the pages. I don't know. I don't know if I agree. The back looks better, but still I can see a crease going up and down just ever so slightly near the spine. I love Sandman. I this is again, I sent it in knowing that there could be some risk involved, so I wanted to make sure that there was still value in a 9.4, and this book does have value, but this one did not get any bump at all. All right, so let's get to the last book and see, maybe this will make or break whether I use this presser. And this last book is going to be interesting because I had assessed this book at a 9.2, and this is Classic X-Men #1. Now, my thinking with this was I saw many pressable defects, and if I could have this presser at least jump it to a 9.6, if not a 9.8, then it would be, you know, not necessarily that the person is a miracle worker, but this was, I think, a more of a significant challenge to go ahead and press this book out. Again, gorgeous book in the slab, really love it, but let's see the grade that it got, where I predicted a 9.2. 9.0. So, it got a 9.0, and again, I can see a major dent right in here, so I'm not pleased with that. I mean, it's right smack in the middle of the book, almost like you took the book and just went like that a little bit, and it created the crease. And the back has 4 color-breaking spine ticks, hairline, I would say, but it's really that crease on the front that that bothered me there. Wow, okay. So my quick thoughts, and then I want to jump back into the spreadsheet to give you the final tally as far as was this worth it. Now, my first emotional reaction is disappointment. Only 2 books got a bump from 9.4 to 9.6. None of them got a 9.8. 1 stayed the same at 9.4, and 2 lost a grade. Now, when I say lost a grade, these were not professionally graded, cracked submissions that I resent. These were my assessed grades, so you could say, well, maybe it was your grading skills, and that's fair because I'm an amateur grader. But I think that what I'm particularly annoyed with is I still see pressable defects, and they didn't come out. Now, there's no guarantees with this work, and the books end up kind of whatever they are, so I know that I have to trust the process, but this did not turn out really the way that I had hoped. I was hoping at minimal none of them would lose a grade, and I would think that any of the pressable defects, I shouldn't be able to see them. You know, if I missed, and this is why I gave this book a 9.2, did I really think it could get a 9.8 with color breaks? No, but I was hoping maybe it gets up to a 9.4. I was really secretly hoping for 1 grade bump per book, and then the potential possibly if they were by some miracle to get a 9.8. So those were the books, those were the grades. Let's take a look at the final value analysis to see if overall was it still worth it to send these books in through a presser. Okay, so here is the final tally and assessment of this order, and let's just get right to it. What I ended up doing was looking at the current fair market value of these books in the grades that I received, and in this column CN, this CGC pressed value is essentially after the cost to acquire the book, to send it out for pressing and cleaning, and then on to CGC for professional grading. After all the cost involved in everything to actually get these books back in my possession, I added 11 cents of value to my collection. Now, you know, was it fun? Was it interesting? Was it nerve-wracking? Was it disappointing? Yes, it was all of those things. I'll be reaching out to Magic Pressing and letting him know about the results. Hopefully he watches this video and kind of sees how his work ended up. Again, a couple books got a grade bump. Great. One was right, kind of the same, unchanged. And a couple lost the grade, in my opinion. The only sort of safeguard I feel that was built in was, again, I tried to manage my risk accordingly so that if this did happen, and it did happen, could I get my money back, right? Am I at a point where I'm going to take a loss on these books? If I sold them collectively or, you know, individually, not as a lot, but if I sold them individually all at the same time and I was able to get fair market value for the books in their grade, I would be able to recoup all of my costs. What it cost me to pick the books up and go through all of this just so I could get this money back, right? And what does this all mean in terms of money and value and investment? Here in column CL, I went ahead and summed this for you. The total of the 5 books, it has fair market value, collectible value of $300. So you look at that and go, hey, you've got $300 worth of comics. Great, good job, good for you. But this is why I track every little detail, because it's not $300 of comics. It's $300 essentially that I spent on those books to get them back in those specific grades. That's what's a little maddening and frustrating, where I was hoping for some 10, 20, 30% gain, maybe more, who knows. And I was just sure that some of those pressable defects could come out. And it's hard to say, like, what is my final opinion here? Am I utterly disappointed? Am I going to contact Magic Pressing and express any sort of displeasure? No, I mean, I think that service was fair. I think the turnaround time was excellent. Communication was very, very good. All of those got A+. It was a wonderful experience. However, the bottom line is, no matter how good the experience is, you still want the best output possible. And unfortunately, it just didn't hit. Now, the argument could be made, and I want to be completely fair here, that I did not grade these books fairly when I assessed them myself. So please understand that as you're watching this. It's not like, hey, this was a guaranteed 9.2 all day long and it got a 9 and it's the presser's fault. That's not what I'm saying. It certainly is always just a judgment call on my part as far as what grade I would assign it. And so you could maybe factor in a plus minus of a grade here or there, because really everything was kind of around my assessed grade. There wasn't anything like shockingly wrong. So I do want that to be understood, that if I'm giving a book a 9.2, a 9.4, or 9.6, or whatever the grade I assign the book, that's up to me and that's on me. But I felt like my assessment of the book was based off of pressable defects at the moment, where I could see the defects and I'm knocking the book for that, assuming that the presser would be able to take care of it. There's a few of the books specifically that have creases and dents in them that, in my opinion, should have come out. If any of the books have color breaks, they are what they are. That there's nothing I can do. If there's a little chip on the corner, that's fine. But some of the books that have those pressable defects, that's where I really want to question it. But I also don't want to overreact either. So I think all in all, the books were in the general ballpark of the grades that I gave them. And on average, they all kind of came back the same. And I think that that's where my hopes and expectations were probably a little too high. And again, I hope that you will learn from this to really understand that there's no magic formula, no pun intended here, in terms of having a book and buying it saying this book can be pressed. So when you hear people like me say, oh, well, I can press this book or I can have it pressed and it's going to be great and be high value, this is a very realistic example of it not always turning out as expected. Let me know what you think of this process. I'd love to get your feedback. Leave a comment. And please consider clicking join to becoming a channel member if you'd like to keep this discussion going amongst my growing channel membership community. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.